The growing gap between the rich and the poor spells disaster for the average American. In this edition of Pro Se Nation, we're going to hear from the co-authors of a newly released book called The Third Way. They're going to share their proposed ideas for changes to the corporate tax laws, which they believe will revive the American economy, especially for the middle class. I'm MaryLynn Schiavi, and welcome. Joining me tonight for this edition of Pro Se Nation are the authors of The Third Way, Upendra Chivukula and Veny Musum. Upendra Chivukula is a co-chair of the Energy Task Force for the Council of State Governments. He is the former deputy speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, representing the 17th Legislative District. Also joining me is Veny Musum, who served as senior vice president of Paul Mitchell Systems in Beverly Hills, California, and who has also presented as a guest lecturer at Rutgers University School of Management and Labor Relations. Veny is currently serving his 8th term on the Bernards Township Republican County Committee. This is a very, some might say, revolutionary book. The Third Way. It's actually building inclusive capitalism through employee ownership. Upendra, I would like to ask you first, what inspired you or prompted you to write this book?
You know, MaryLynn, I served in the state legislature for many years. One of the things they keep talking about is how do you address the income inequality. One of the solutions that were proposed was increasing the minimum wage. And we tried several times in the legislature. That did not happen. Here comes Veny to my office, whom I knew. We worked together on the Lyme disease advocacy, and he comes to me and he said, "Upendra, I have this great idea and called The Third Way." And I said, "What is that, Veny?" He said, "Well, look at capitalism, look at communism. Communism has failed and the capitalism works, but it is not fair." And I'm hearing this from a Republican saying that capitalism is not fair, being a Democrat, and said, "What do we do about it?" And he said, "Let's write, I want to hire somebody so that we can have a book written." And I said, "No, Veny, we should write it together."
One of the things you talk about is inclusive capitalism.
Yes.
Veny, what does that mean?
Well, that's going to be on the lips of every American by the time we're done, because inclusive capitalism is the solution to this income inequality problem that you're hearing over and over and over again. Income inequality is real. It is absolutely happening. The Congressional Budget Office just did a report saying that over the past several years, the top 1% has grown by over 275% their income. The top 1%, while the rest of America is either flat or declining. That's a serious problem. The other thing it's on our website, by the way, these charts on thethirdwaybook.com, our site. The other thing that Brookings just came out with a report showing that of the past several years, the top 20% has had their capital wealth and capital income increase by 84%. So my math tells you that the bottom 80% is left with only 14% of capital wealth. This is really the sine qua non, the thing that people have to understand, is that the real divide is not in the wage side, which is a serious problem, but we're forgetting about the capital side of the equation. And you're not hearing this in the media today. This is what has to be addressed, because if you look at the data, shows the wealth, the massive wealth that's being created is coming on the capital side, not necessarily on the wage side. So we have to put intelligent public policy in place to begin to spread broad-based property ownership, broad-based wealth creation, and that's what inclusive capitalism is. Capitalism isn't a bad thing. The problem is who owns it. And right now it's being concentrated. People don't like crony capitalism, and we call it concentrated capitalism. That's the problem.
Well, it seems like what has happened certainly since the Great Recession, right, which pretty much began 2008, I guess, officially.
Yeah.
Was that the official date? I mean, if you think about it, so many people lost their homes. Mm-hmm. Like a ridiculous number of people lost their homes. Sure. That was, you know, they may not have been the owner of the means of production as in, you know, the Marxian Karl Marx sense, but they owned something that would hopefully increase in value over their lifetime.
Yes, but it
Or
was
say-
not. Here's the key. And I've even seen people in major media people say, "Oh, well, you have your house. That's a piece of capital, but it's not necessarily an income-producing piece of capital." That's the big
Right,
difference.
and with so many people, again, losing their home, so they lost the one thing that could theoretically accrue value a great deal over time.
In many cases, it declined. In many
Right.
cases, they lost value.
Also, when you depend on wages, I mean, you're always one paycheck away from going to be poor.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because
There's-
given the healthcare costs and cost of living standards you have to maintain, you need something that will supplement your income through wages.
So, Upendra, in sort of a nutshell, what are you proposing in this book, without giving away, as Wayne Dyer used to say, the whole enchilada? But just sort of an overview of what you're proposing.
Well, what we are saying is that you are going to pay the wages and people are going to work for wages and they're going to make money. But I think if you give them a part of the company that they work for, and as the company grows, there is also motivation for them to work hard to make the company successful. And as you work hard, we're not asking the owners of the company to give it all to the employees, but give a part of that. So that way they can also accumulate the capital. The capital grows much faster than the wages that you can earn, because you have only 24 hours in a day. How many hours can you work? But your capital is working 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. I think that's what we are saying. I think why not have, that's what inclusive capitalism is. When you're trying to include your employees in your wealth making, so that way they're also part owners of the company and they can also grow personally and individually.
So you're proposing essentially a robust profit sharing program that would be de rigueur at most companies, right?
Well, okay. Let's be clear here. There's really two ways, and in two major ways. Some companies do it via profit sharing. The other part is equity sharing. Those are two. We like both.
Okay.
I prefer, obviously, equity, which Upendra is talking about, where you actually have ownership, you have equity in the company.
Okay.
So there's ways of sharing profit, but there's also another way of doing it via equity. Now let me say something right out, I want to get this right out the bat. Our book, The Third Way, every millionaire and billionaire already knows what's in this book. They already know. The problem is the poor and the middle class do not know what is in this book. They don't understand how wealth is being created in the 21st century. Right now we have an 18th century economic system, a capitalistic system, which is great, it produces wealth, but we're living in a 21st century technologically driven world. We need to get modernized in terms of our public policy to match that. And like we always say is, save the country, save the world, but for gosh sakes, at least save yourself and learn what's in this book for you and your children and your grandchildren. You must acquire income-producing, technologically driven capital, or you will be run over.
Now, what you're proposing, how is this different from, I mean, I think a lot of big companies offer bonuses. Is it like a bonus?
The bonus is a one time. You go
okay.
and buy, Christmas sales, you go and buy things. But I think this is a capital that is provides you recurring income. That means it is going to grow as the company is growing. That way your equity is growing. I think that's the key. It's not a one-time bonus. Is one time, an annual bonus, and then it's up to you individual what you're going to do with it. And of course you can invest that also. But I think here you are giving a stake in the company, so that way you feel part of the company's growth, and you are going to work harder. And it also has data shows that companies that offer employee ownership, they have the less amount of unemployment. So that's one way you can address the unemployment issue through having more employee-owned companies. Currently, we have 10 million people.
No, it's only nearly 15 million.
15 million.
10,000 companies doing this.
10,000 companies, right?
Yes,
You said that.
Yes.
Now, one of the questions I had, and
we want to get. Well, by the way, we want to get it from 15 million to 150 million. Then you would see the income inequality problem not just solved, but permanently solved.
Right.
But people don't realize how many people are already participating.
Could you mention some of the companies that are already doing this?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's some large, medium, and small companies. This idea is what built Silicon Valley. Microsoft, Google, Cisco. You look at other, Procter & Gamble has been doing this for decades.
Right.
The great thing about this, and Upendra touched on this, was everybody wins. Very important to bring this out, is the employees win because they now share in the company. They now have income instead of just their wages. The company wins. There's another great book that was put out, Inclusive Capitalism. About 100 years of data show that virtually every business metric, and I'm a business person at heart, every business metric goes up. All the ones you want to go up, profits, productivity, sales, everything you want to go up goes up, not 100%, nothing's 100%, but overwhelmingly good. The things you don't want, absenteeism, things of that nature, people are much more motivated when they're part of the company. This is a way of doing, of really broad-based property ownership without some kind of redistribution model that is the socialistic model that we know has failed over and over and over again.
Yeah. One of the things, I had AT&T, I was able to retire at the age of 48 because AT&T had the employees stock ownership program, which I was able to invest and I was able to make money. Similarly, Veny also was able to take retirement because of we had a stake in the companies where we worked, and we were able to invest, and that capital grew and was able to provide us income in the long term.
Yeah.
Well, I think so many people go into their own business because, or want to go into their own businesses because they want to feel that their hard work is going toward something that they will keep, right?
Yes.
They're not just kind of a wage slave, which so many people have become, right?
Yes.
So it's something they can grow and then maybe sell at some point. So that is, they want to be the owner of the means of production, right?
Sure.
One question that comes up for me, so if there's roughly 10,000 American companies that are doing this, why aren't they all doing it if it has such a good, so many great byproducts?
Because there's really no incentive. Right now, on the federal level, which is what our book is driving at, there's really no direct incentive. That's got to change. We're really having some very foolish public policy. So we need to incentivize companies. There's a quiet revolution going on. People don't know. There's now, as of last year, there's now more people in employee ownership than there are in public in unions. So union membership is going down steadily, where employee ownership is going up. It's now climbing towards nearly 15 million. We want to get that to 150 million with some simple changes to the corporate tax law. And let me just back up a second and say something very, very important. In the information age, this is what every person watching this show needs to know and teach their children and grandchildren. In the information age, you simply cannot get ahead just on wages alone. You must acquire income-producing capital. For example, there's a lot of debate about the minimum wage. The federal minimum wage has been raised over 29 times, and yet the problem gets worse. Why? Because they're working on the wrong side of the equation. Think of the word minimum wage. How pathetic. We have people scrounging for the minimum. Why not instead let's focus on maximum capital appreciation, maximum capital. That would be how to produce real wealth, not people scrounging for minimums, right? So there's a lot of debate. Listen, some people are for or against the minimum wage. That's neither here nor there. But the main thing is let's focus on the other side of the equation, where all the money is, where the technology is driving capital accumulation. That's what people should be focused on. You don't hear it on any other show. You're hearing it on this one, though.
One of the things is that
you heard it here first.
That's right.
One of the things is that in the 80s there was a law that was supporting incentivizing companies. That's why you have 10,000 companies offering employee stock ownership plans. Unfortunately, that got cut in the late 80s, and so that's why we were saying that, look, that is a bad policy, cutting it. You got to make sure that you have to continue that.
So I'd like to get to, this sounds great. This sounds like,
That's what everybody says. That's what everybody says.
Well, it's certainly, if you think about it, when people have, however you want to say it, skin in the game, or they, they're invested, they are truly invested, then they feel like they're going to their own shop or their own factory every day, or their own office and office building. So the question is, how do you incentivize companies to do this. And so you're proposing that there are changes to the tax laws on the state level and the federal level.
Right.
Did either of you want to speak to one or the other, or?
Well, I think, we got to go back to the 80s and see there were some mistakes were made in the 80s law, in that if you have lending institutions can lend money, so that way the companies can set up leveraged ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, and for that they get 50% on the interest income. They'll get 50% tax off. I think that's the key. That's one of the things we are saying, and that will help, because a lot of the companies already know, big companies already know how to pay. They know all the IRS rules, and so they try to pay the minimum income that is they have to pay out. But we are saying that give those incentives 50%, and also for areas where there is economically deprived areas, maybe you have to give 100%, so that way there's more investment coming into those areas and create opportunities for people, so that way they can also acquire capital.
Yeah.
Now you're proposing, so would you call this a radical adjustment to the corporate tax law?
Well, let's be clear, MaryLynn.
Okay.
Currently, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world at 35%. Virtually every presidential candidate on both sides of the aisle, especially on my side of the aisle, the Republicans, are saying we need to reduce that. And I agree that the corporate tax rate now is a real mistake. It's a very foolish way to try to. First of all, it doesn't raise much income. Second of all, the corporations don't necessarily pay the tax. That just passed along to us in the form of higher prices. Then you have the army of accountants and lawyers trying to avoid it. For example, GE pays almost no corporate tax. So it's a really stupid way to try to raise revenue. And the other thing it does is it makes us uncompetitive with the rest of the world. So it's all great. But let me say something to my Republican friends and to everyone else out there. Yes, we should cut the corporate tax rate, but, and this is Republican talking, not one dime unless you have public policy in place to share that corporate tax rates with workers in the form of broad-based property ownership. We have 3 proposals, and Upendra touched on them. Number 1, a 50% reduction in the corporate tax rate. Bring that down in half, make us more competitive if you share it with the workers. And the second thing is, which is one of my favorite, the second point is, in these inner cities, the urban and rural enterprise zones, cut it to 0. But if and only if you're sharing with people in those areas. Can you imagine what this would do to the culture of those places in these inner cities? Now, I live in Bernards Township, the suburbia, but I grew up in the hard, tough streets of Newark, New Jersey, and I can tell you what this would do to the culture of, for example, in the gang culture. Why do people join that? Because they have no hope.
Right.
There's no prospects of anything. A kid is not going to spray paint a building that he owns, and he ain't going to let his homeboys do it either.
Right.
So that's the second, and the third one was Upendra said is, we used to have a 50% income exclusion for banks to make these low interest loans to ESOPs. Foolishly, both Republican and Democratic administrations, the Bush 41 and the Clinton administration, cut it in half and then eliminated it. Really, really stupid. So we're saying to bring that back. At the time, almost every Fortune 500 company had an office ready to start initiating these ESOPs and putting this all across all the companies in the United States. But it was very foolishly cut out of the budget. One of the most catastrophic mistakes in the history of legislation. Huge mistake. We need to bring that back.
So in our pre-interview, we talked about, again, this sounds fantastic. Let's do it tomorrow. But if you give these tax breaks, say everybody signs up, the laws change, and so now these companies across the board are paying far less taxes. But I think you said in the pre-interview that there would be no way of ensuring that they do this. There would be no penalty.
We're not forcing.
Okay.
We would not that's another
So,
thing. And a lot of people on my side of the aisle say they're ready. Oh, here's big government going to force companies. No, this is voluntary.
Okay.
This is absolutely voluntary. The thing about it is that people don't realize that this actually helps the companies. The companies become more profitable. They become literally. I talk to a lot of business people. A lot of people on every strata, millionaires, billionaires. I've not had one tell me that if this was in place, that they would immediately offer this to their employees. They would much rather share it with their employees than send it off to Washington, down to, you know, God knows where, because they know that if they were able to incentivize their employees, they would raise productivity, raise the morale of the employees. Every business metric goes up, and that's what you want.
Yeah, one of the things you're looking at is how we're going to implement it and making sure that the money goes to the employees. I think you know, these are all through the tax laws, and every company has to file the tax filings, so the information is going to be there. But of course, you know, you want to make sure that it is done right. It's an incentive, and making sure that be cautious and make sure that they are. You have to create the checks and balances to make sure that they do give it out. I think that's an important thing.
So, Upendra, do you believe companies will, once they get the tax breaks, they will step up to the plate and do this?
I believe so. We already have 10,000 companies already doing that. All we are trying to do is that how do you make it much more palatable for more companies and try to do that. Because a lot of companies, you know, as a nation, we have a challenge of unemployment. And how do you solve the unemployment? By having the employees own their piece of their company, so that way we can cut down the unemployment. I think also companies are going to be very happy when you have a very productive employee contributing towards the success of the company. It's not like working where, you know, you go there and collect your paycheck, but you are saying that I'm going to work hard, maybe a few hours extra, maybe smarter. I will try to produce more, so that way the company grows. As the company grows, of course, the top management is going to get a lot of money, but I think the people below also get some of that earnings.
Now, tell us about the law, the legislative changes that have been introduced in New Jersey.
Well, you know, this is the legislation. Basically, the federal law addresses a lot of the companies that are Fortune 500 companies, publicly traded companies. The state law that was introduced, state legislation, that deals with the privately held companies that have under 500 employees, small businesses basically. Could be a main street mom and shop companies, stores and things like that. So what they are going to get the 30% tax credits if they share that with their employee. They can sell, instead of selling their companies when they want to retire, instead of selling to some out-of-state corporations, they can sell it to their employees, so that way they can continue through that incentive.
And so what is the name of the bill or that's
been introduced? The bill is Assembly Bill 4021 and the Senate Bill 945. And basically that is what it talks about. We are this legislation already working in the state of Iowa. The governor signed the legislation. We're trying to get it through the. New Jersey has a lot of fiscal challenges. You know, we have to convince the people. I think the proof is in the pudding. Basically, we're trying to show that this works. It has worked in Iowa. It should work here. And the legislation, the way it is written, it is makes a net economic benefit to the state. So the way it is done, the program is going to be overseen by the Economic Development Authority. And they will make sure that this is net positive to the state. Then only they will approve that transaction.
And when was this signed into law in Iowa?
It was done about 4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Time flies.
And how is it going in Iowa? I mean,
it's going very well. We did not hear anything negative about it, and even though it cost the state, you know, probably $1 million in terms of putting the money up front for the tax credits. In New Jersey, our legislation is different in that you will have the net economic benefit because of the Economic Development Authority oversight.
So how would you respond to essentially, you know, it could be seen as a criticism or viewed as a criticism. This sounds socialistic, it sounds communistic, right? I mean, you're talking about a redistribution of wealth, which is kind of done through the government in the sense of changing laws, right? So how would you respond to that?
Well, there's a lot of ways. I love this question because first of all,
and I love asking.
First of all, let's be clear. This is a private initiative. This is not in other words, the state helps to facilitate this by giving the corporate tax rates,
Right.
but really it's a private transaction between the company sharing with their workers. Now, let me quote.
It's also voluntary. It's not mandated.
Voluntary. Yeah. Let me quote from one of
Right,
the.
but you're still using, I mean, essentially, it's still using taxpayer dollars, right?
Well, no. The way our plan is structured, there is no net loss. There's no net loss to the
Okay.
Treasury.
All right.
Yes, because first of all, we call for obviously the employee themselves would bear some of the burden of because of the increased income that they would have.
Right.
But also then we're cutting out a lot of the loopholes. There's a lot of huge loopholes in the tax law that allow companies like GE to pay a 35% tax rate to pay zero. Most of the companies are wind up paying, sometimes down to half to 17% because of all these corporate loopholes. A lot of these are very bad. There's another loophole that's there in the IRS code. It's IRS 162M that allowed companies to deduct wages to top upper management of only $1 million. However, they allowed unlimited deductions for what they call incentive pay to top executives on incentive pay, the capital side. So what have we done? We and that, by the way, that cost the Treasury over $86 billion just in stock options alone. So it's a huge giveaway to the top upper echelon of the corporation. What we're proposing is
And so why is this not communism or socialism? Socialistic in a sense?
First of all, that's a giveaway to the top upper 1% or the top 5 people in the corporation. We're saying let's broaden that out. We should say you shouldn't be allowed to do any of that unless you have a broad-based stock equity program. Then you should be allowed. We don't want to take away. We do not want to take away from the wealthy. This is not what this is about. It's not a redistribution plan.
You're not playing Robin Hood here.
No, there's basically three things. You either have a redistribution, which is a socialistic model. We're not for that. A plutocracy, which is where we're going, which is this concentrated capital, or the third way, which is a broad-based property ownership. And that's, by the way, supported by the founding fathers like Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Lincoln, all the great, and Ronald Reagan too.
Okay.
No, I think the employees also.
Actually, I'm so sorry. We are running out of time for this main program, but I'm going to ask you back for another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, fine.
Okay,
Sure.
great. So I want to conclude this segment of Pro Se Nation and invite you, if you have any ideas for topics for future programs, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, please contact us through the website prosenation.org or on Facebook. I'm MaryLynn Schiavi, and see you in the future.